This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. An American couple serving as missionaries in Haiti have been killed. One of them was reportedly the daughter of a U.S. state representative. According to their church group, Davy and Natalie Lloyd were ambushed by 3 trucks full of gang members on Thursday evening at around 9 p.m. local time. Both of them were shot and killed. Natalie Lloyd is the daughter of Missouri State Representative Ben Baker. In a post on Facebook, Baker said, quote, "My heart is broken in 1,000 pieces. I've never felt this kind of pain." In the wake of this tragic incident, the White House has called for a rapid deployment of a Kenyan-led multinational security force to Haiti. The Caribbean nation has been plagued with gang violence. Lately, there have been multiple coordinated attacks, which led to the resignation of Prime Minister Ariel Henry. Updates coming in from the war in Ukraine. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is pushing for more aid for Ukraine at the Group of 7 finance ministers meeting.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Friday told G7 finance ministers that they could squeeze more money for Ukraine out of frozen Russian assets. She is pushing for, quote, more ambitious options to unlock money from some $260 billion in Russian central bank reserves frozen in Europe and the U.S. Proposals include borrowing against the future interest income from the frozen assets so that Ukraine could be given as much as $50 billion immediately. This comes as Ukraine is facing more difficulties on the battlefield. The Ukrainian military admitted Russia has had partial success in the Donetsk region, but said the situation in the Kharkiv region was under control.
As far as Pokrovsk and Kharkov are concerned, these are currently 2 hot areas. There is fierce fighting going on there. The enemy keeps launching assaults day and night, deploying huge manpower supported by military hardware. Yes, as of now, the enemy has tactical success there. We have lost some positions there, but operationally, the enemy has not been successful.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Kharkiv Friday in a show of support for the city currently facing Russian airstrikes. Meanwhile, 4 Russian sources told Reuters that President Vladimir Putin is ready for a ceasefire. The sources said Putin is okay with a negotiated ceasefire that recognizes the current battlefield lines. They also said Putin appeared frustrated that the West is backing attempts to stymie negotiations and that Zelensky is ruling out talks. Putin on Friday visited neighboring Belarus and met with his close ally, President Alexander Lukashenko. Their talks are expected to focus on security and exercises with tactical nuclear weapons. Reporting by Allison Lee, NTD News.
Earlier today, the European Union criticized Russia for removing buoys from a river separating its border with Estonia. The Baltic country had installed the buoys to prevent boats from accidentally crossing the border. Estonia said they noticed Russian border guards removed 25 of the 50 buoys. The EU said this is unacceptable and called this a broader pattern of provocative behavior. The EU demanded an explanation from Moscow and asked that they immediately return the buoys. The United Nations International Court of Justice ordered Israel today to halt its military assault in Rafah. The decision was met with condemnation from the Israeli and U.S. governments as the war in Gaza continues. NTD's Fiona G has the latest updates.
Yes, as you mentioned, the United Nations International Court of Justice today ordered Israel to stop its military offensive in the city of Rafah. It is ordering Israel to open the Rafah crossing between Egypt and Gaza to allow in humanitarian aid, and they're also ordering it to allow investigators access into the besieged area.
Israel must take effective measures to ensure the unimpeded access to the Gaza Strip of any commission of inquiry, fact-finding mission, or other investigative body mandated by competent organs of the United Nations to investigate allegations of genocide.
Now, out of 15 judges, only 2 opposed the ruling. 1 judge was from Israel and the other from Uganda. The decision is part of South Africa's case against Israel's actions in Gaza. Hamas welcomed the announcement, pledging their cooperation with any UN investigation, but they were also saying that it wasn't enough, and they're calling on the UN Security Council to take practical action against the, quote, Zionist enemy. The Israeli government says they will continue to fight to defend their country. It consistently rejects the case's genocide accusations as baseless. The ICJ has no power to enforce its ruling. And in the latest development out of the hostage situation in the Israel-Hamas war, the Israeli army says today that they have recovered the bodies of 3 more hostages from Gaza.
It is with a heavy heart that I share that last night, Israeli special forces in Gaza rescued the bodies of our hostages, Hanania Vlonka, Michelle Nissenbaum, Orion Hernandez. Their bodies were rescued during a special operation based on precise intelligence in the area of Gaza.
All 3 had been killed during Hamas's attacks on October 7th, and their bodies had been taken to Gaza. The overnight operation took place as intense fighting continues in Gaza, and House Speaker Mike Johnson reaffirmed the United States government's support for Israel. He delivered a keynote address yesterday at the Israel Embassy's annual Independence Day reception in Washington, D.C.
Washington has been united, I'm proud to tell you, in a bipartisan manner against this madness, and we will stand together. And tonight I'm happy to announce something else to you, that we will soon be hosting Prime Minister Netanyahu at the Capitol for a joint session of Congress. Yes. This will be a timely and I think a very strong show of support to the Israeli government in their time of greatest need.
Now, it is unclear when Netanyahu will be addressing a joint session of Congress, but Johnson said he will be sending a formal invitation this week. That's all from me for now. Back to you.
Turning now to Hunter Biden's federal gun case, a Delaware judge today barring prosecutors from using salacious evidence in the upcoming trial. That includes references to Hunter's tax case in California, his child support proceeding in Arkansas, and his discharge from the Navy. Prosecutors are looking to prove that the president's son lied about his alleged drug use to buy a revolver in 2018. They plan on using pictures from Hunter's laptop, as well as portions of his memoir, to convince the jury. The judge said today that prosecutors need to show only that Hunter was addicted to drugs at that time of the purchase, not that he used drugs on the day he bought the gun. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to all charges in the case. The jury selection is set to begin on June 3rd. President Biden and former President Trump sparring over economic policies after Trump appealed to New Yorkers at a massive rally in the Bronx. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more on the rare New York rally and the latest in the 2024 race.
And President Biden's campaign today issued a statement accusing Trump of trying to cut Social Security and Medicare, adding that Trump's economic agenda will, quote, screw everyone. And that's right after Trump held a massive rally in one of the bluest parts of New York last night, appealing to voters on the issues of inflation and crime. Watch.
Who said we're not going to win New York? We're going to win New York. So we're going to bring businesses and big taxpayers back to New York. We're going to bring safety back to our street.
And Trump today called the rally in Bronx a startling event. The turnout was much larger than expected. And Trump also again appealed to New Yorkers today, vowing to terminate congestion pricing in Lower Manhattan, calling it a disaster for New York City and blaming it on President Biden. And tomorrow on Saturday, we'll see another split-screen moment as Trump will speak at the Libertarian Party convention in D.C., while Biden is slated to give a commencement address at West Point, during which we expect him to touch on issues in the 2024 race. Reporting from New York City, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Mayors from 40 different cities are seeking work permits for illegal immigrants. They're asking President Biden to allow over 2 million illegal immigrants to work.
The mayors of New York City and Chicago are leading the coalition of 40 cities. They sent a letter to President Biden asking him to use Homeland Security to grant parole to the immigrants. They say that would apply to long-term undocumented immigrants and our most recent arrivals to create a process for streamlined work authorization. The mayors say the people in need of work authorizations have for decades worked diligently, started businesses, and more, but that those people often had to endure dangerous work conditions and exploitation. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has advocated for work permits throughout the immigration crisis, which has plagued his city for months now.
We must expedite work visas. It's just common sense. Thousands of jobs are available to be filled to provide the services we need in the city, the state, and this country.
In this week's letter, the mayors also try to appeal to Biden from a political side. They write that a substantial majority of Americans, including approximately half of surveyed Republicans, strongly endorse the extension of work permits, and that this issue resonates in key electoral states like Nevada, Arizona, and others. This comes just months ahead of the 2024 presidential election. The mayors conclude the letter by saying that immigrants add significant value to the U.S. economy as taxpayers, consumers, entrepreneurs, and more. A point Adams has been making.
American labor not only built a movement, they built this city and they built this country. And we could continue to build a pipeline of workers in this country.
In 2021, IZA World of Labor published a report on giving work permits to illegal immigrants. It found that there are also various negative effects to the legalization programs. For example, that they may lead to more immigration, create more competition for existing workers, and government spending on social services may increase. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Next week, jury deliberations are set to begin in the New York criminal case against former President Trump. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards is at the News Hub to give us a recap of what the jury will have to consider in this historic case.
Tiffany, both sides have rested their cases and Judge Juan Merchan has adjourned the trial until next week. Attorneys on both sides will give their closing statements on Tuesday. Former President Trump faces 34 charges of falsifying business records and up to 4 years in prison if he is convicted. Now, legal experts have said that he's not likely to go to jail because first-time offenders typically get probation, but it will all depend on what the judge decides. Now, let's take a look at what the jury will have to consider next week. Now, the jury is comprised of 5 women and 7 men from various backgrounds, including 2 attorneys, a teacher, and a physical therapist. The prosecution has called 19 witnesses, but 3 of those witnesses were key to the prosecution's heart of their case. They include David Pecker, a former CEO of a tabloid newspaper company, Stormy Daniels, a former adult film actress, and Michael Cohen, former personal attorney to Trump. Now let's start off with David Pecker. Pecker testified about a so-called catch and kill scheme. Pecker said that he met Trump and Cohen in 2015 to discuss a plan whereby he would find negative stories about Trump, purchase them, and then bury them. He said in his testimony, "If I hear anything about women selling stories, I would notify Michael Cohen, as I did over the last several years. He would be able to have them killed in another magazine." Now, on cross-examination, he said this phrase, catch and kill, he had never heard of it before until the prosecution mentioned it during the trial. He testified that it's common practice for him to buy stories in his line of business and that he had done it for several celebrities and politicians over the years, not just Trump. Next is Stormy Daniels. Stormy Daniels is the adult film actress who gave a detailed testimony about an alleged encounter with Trump. Legal experts have said that her testimony was highly prejudicial and that it added no value to the prosecution's case. Next is the star witness, Michael Cohen. Now, Michael Cohen admits that he lies a lot, and he testified that Trump instructed him to pay Daniels and that Trump reimbursed him. The prosecution showed the jury notes written by former CFO Alan Weisselberg on Cohen's bank statement, showing the $130,000 that was transferred by Cohen to Stormy Daniels' attorney, Keith Davidson. Cohen said he was reimbursed in monthly installments in 2017, mostly from Trump's personal bank account, and that he was told to send false invoices indicating that the payment was for a retainer agreement, even though he didn't work for the company or Trump. On cross-examination, Cohen admitted he worked as President Trump's personal attorney in 2017, although he didn't meet with him regularly. He confirmed that it is standard practice for an attorney to get paid monthly under a retainer agreement, even though he has minimal contact with the client. Cohen said he never signed a retainer agreement. Michael Cohen is the only witness to testify that Trump falsified business records. Now the jury will have to decide whether or not Trump did that and whether he also tried to avoid reporting it as a campaign donation. And we may find out the answer to that as early as next week.
Earlier, we spoke with Lawrence Wilson, political reporter at the Epoch Times, about Trump's campaign. Wilson has been following the 2024 election cycle, and we discussed how Trump and President Biden approach minority voters. Lawrence Wilson, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Tiffany.
Now, we saw Trump campaigning in the Bronx, one of the bluest places you could see in the country. Now, he's angling for the black vote there. How significant is the black vote in determining who could be the next president?
Well, it really is always significant. It's millions of voters, and the reason it's not often referred to is that black voters have historically been very committed to the Democratic Party. What's changing is that we're seeing some black voters, and especially black men, migrating away from the Democratic Party and beginning to support the Republican Party, and some very strong support for President Trump. Now, the reason it could be significant in determining the result is that this election, while the previous contest between these two in 2020 was very close in some states. So a significant shift among black voters could be enough to swing the overall election if it's significant enough.
How do you compare the Biden and Trump campaign strategies to win over the black and Latino votes?
Well, it's interesting the way they're approaching it. President Trump is going straight after the working class in general, but particularly among black voters. So he's going to places like the Bronx, and he went to a very industrialized area in Michigan not long ago, talked about bringing back manufacturing. So he's really focused on working class issues. The economy is huge. And of course, the lower anybody is on the income scale, the harder hit they are by the economy. He's also talking about immigration. And many people, even who are immigrants to the country themselves, are very concerned about what's happening at the border right now. President Biden, on the other hand, he's kind of referring to his record. He's saying, look, here are the things that I've done for you, talking about some economic achievements and ways in which his policies have helped the black community. And he's reaching out to sort of the traditional black constituency. So you went to a historically black college for a commencement address about a week ago. And so he's reaching out to what you might call the tried and true pathways of reaching into the black community. President Trump is going a little bit different. He's going to the black voters.
On the aspect of Trump's strategy being a little different, Trump has been in Manhattan due to the New York criminal court. Now, that has not stopped him from campaigning in the moments either before, after, in between courtrooms. We saw the rally in New Jersey recently, and of course the one in the Bronx. What do you make of Trump's strategy here? Is it resonating with people?
Well, it seems to be, given the crowd that he drew in the Bronx just yesterday, which a very large turnout there, and he's made smaller, what I would call drive-by stops while he's been in New York, really tied there for his trial. He went to a bodega at which a person had been stabbed to death, and that was to highlight his message on crime. He stopped by a construction site, reaching out to union workers, and those stops seemed to be very well received by the working class and the inner city voters, where he was trying to appeal to them. So it's hard to tell yet in the polling how much difference that's made. It's only been a few weeks, but his reception seems to be very strong in those places.
Lawrence Wilson, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
The Libertarian Party is holding its 2024 National Convention in Washington, D.C. During the next 3 days, Libertarians will gather to pick their presidential candidate. Today's keynote speaker is independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez is at that event.
During the next 3 days, Libertarian delegates will listen and debate the platform ideas of over a dozen presidential hopefuls before picking their presidential nominee. Congressman Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, believes Libertarians could decide the result of this year's 2024 general elections.
Either party would adopt one of these, one of their platform planks, that party could gain an advantage. So, for instance, criminalizing marijuana, I've always said the first party that says we're not going to do that is going to pick up 5%. If you would come out and say you would pardon Julian Assange, right? If you would come out against the wars. But there are opportunities for the Libertarian Party.
Congressman Thomas Massie believes election season is in full swing and politicians will tune in their political message to undecided voters.
So most of the big bills have passed. I think you're going to see 5 months of political posturing. This is just what happens. Settle in, expect to see lots of messaging bills that are going nowhere, bills in the Senate and bills in the House.
This Friday's keynote speaker at the Libertarian National Convention was Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he stressed the importance of defeating President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump in the ballot.
I'm sorry to say that neither President Trump nor President Biden passed this critical examination. Neither of them upheld the Constitution. It all started with the social media and the mainstream media, apparently without any government prompting, began censoring any speech that departed from the government's official orthodoxies. It's critical to the survival of any democracy that the free press maintains a posture of fierce skepticism.
National polls show former President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden with over 40% of voters' support, while Robert Kennedy Jr. receives less than 10% of voters' support. President Donald Trump is expected to deliver an address to the Libertarian National Convention Saturday night. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The Transportation Security Administration predicted that today will be the busiest day for air travel over the long holiday weekend, with nearly 3 million people expected to pass through airport checkpoints. NTD's David Lamb has the details.
On Thursday, TSA screened just under 2.9 million people, coming close to breaking the record set on the Sunday after Thanksgiving last year. NTD spoke to travelers about their Memorial Day weekend.
We're going to go home and visit some family. We live away from family, so it's just going to be going back and just hanging out with family, having her meet the great-grandparents, and getting to have a good first experience with her on a plane.
I'm home for graduations, family graduations for high school.
I'm excited. My brother's graduating from high school next week, so.
Now, people we spoke to said they didn't notice it to be more busy than usual because it's still an early Friday morning and they booked their flights ahead of the Memorial Day rush. Now, the spokesperson for San Jose International Airport here in Silicon Valley told us that on a typical weekend in May, they usually have about 55,000 passengers going to and from. But this Saturday and Sunday, they're expecting almost 80,000 people. That's a 45% jump.
The flight costs weren't bad. It probably was more on the expensive side because I booked it a little last minute, but compared to like winter breaks and spring breaks, it was cheaper than those.
For 5 people, it was like $1,500, but I bought them a long time ago, so there was no sticker shock because I knew this was coming, so it wasn't a surprise move.
Actually, it was pretty empty this morning. I flew from Eugene, so there's almost no one there, so it was really nice. I am expecting it to be a little bit busier on Monday.
Highways are also likely to be jammed the next few days.
depending on what they were saying on the news this morning, that people might be driving more than flying.
AAA predicted a busiest start of summer weekend in nearly 20 years, with around 44 million people expected to roam at least 50 miles between Thursday and Monday, with 38 million of them taking vehicles.
As we've seen, people are traveling this weekend to visit friends and family, which brings us to this XO sculpture, which represents hug and a kiss. And if you look closer, the birds symbolize safe flight and traveling. Reporting in San Jose, California, David Lamb, NTD News.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. The United Nations International Court of Justice ordered Israel to halt its military operations in the city of Rafah, but did not order a full ceasefire. Israel said it won't change course in Rafah following the ruling. An American missionary couple were shot and killed by criminal gang members in Haiti. They were abducted while leaving a youth group activity held by a church in the capital. The couple were the daughter and son-in-law of Missouri State lawmaker Ben Baker. G7 finance ministers met to discuss what to do with frozen Russian assets. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen pushed for more ambitious options to unlock the money and fund Ukraine's war efforts. Meanwhile, sources told Reuters that Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready for a ceasefire on current front lines. Travelers dealt with big crowds and flight delays as the Memorial Day long weekend began. More than 4,000 flights were delayed on the East Coast as nearly 3 million people were expected to pass through airport checkpoints. Former President Trump's New York criminal trial will resume next week with closing arguments. Joining us now to discuss the trial is David Katz, former assistant U.S. attorney and former federal prosecutor. David, thank you so much for joining us. Great to see you again.
Great to be with you.
Now, to begin, we just saw Trump campaign in the Bronx last night. He's been anchored in New York due to his criminal trial, which resumes next week. Now, we haven't heard from the judge yet about the jury instructions. He was meant to rule by the end of this week. What do you make of this and what it could mean for the case?
Well, one thing, I don't see him as being marooned in New York. You know, he's got that jet plane of his where he could have gone anywhere he wanted to, an hour after the trial, ceased for the week. On top of that, in terms of the jury instructions, they've been delayed a bit. But guessing what the closing arguments are going to be, it'll be the point, Tiffany, that they made during the trial. He'll say that he was just trying to protect his wife and his family from learning about this. He'll say that Michael Cohen is a liar, a perjurer, a thief. They shouldn't believe a word that he says. And I think we're going to get to what the prosecution arguments are going to be. But those are going to be the main themes from Trump. And it's a nothing burger, and he didn't have any bad intent. Like I said, to the extent that he cared about it because he didn't want his wife to find out this blackmail allegation against him, which he'll argue is totally untrue, even though there's the evidence. He didn't take the stand, he didn't present evidence, but he'll argue it's totally untrue. It's just blackmail. He didn't want his wife to find out about these awful allegations.
And what about the jury deliberations? How long do you expect that to take, or how quickly might we get a verdict?
I think it will take them a few days because there's a lot of evidence to go through. Apparently, some of them were copious note takers. You have two lawyers who are on the panel. I think they'll ask the other jurors, especially, to be careful and go through the evidence. And then there'll be at least, I think, 1 or 2 people who'll need to be persuaded. If it's going to be unanimous, I don't think it's going to be 12-0 on the first vote. I think there'll be some people who are brought along by the majority of the jurors, and that's normal. Normally there are a few dissenters, and then they're persuaded by reason and by a couple of days of deliberation and going over the evidence. So that's what I'm expecting. There'll be some jury notes when they have questions, and the judge will answer them in written form.
I want to zoom in on the 2 lawyers on the jury. What kind of role could they play? You mentioned it might, convince the other jurors. What could we see in that regards?
I don't think they'll necessarily be dominant. People are worried, litigators are worried to ever have a jury with a lawyer on it because they're worried that the lawyer will take charge, become the foreperson. But they have it's a Manhattan jury. There are a lot of very accomplished people. When you look, there's an investment banker on it. There's a lot of people that you can predict will not be, they won't just roll over for whatever the 2 lawyers have to think. So I don't think it's going to have a major impact on it. But to the extent that, you can stereotype the lawyers, I think that they'll be critical about it, and they'll say, is is the evidence really there for the felony? How much have they really shown that Trump knew and intended for the specific aims of unlawful conduct, which is a whole other issue in the jury instructions?
I want to zoom in on that. For this to be a felony, right? Falsifying business records alone isn't enough. That's a misdemeanor under New York law. It has to be done to conceal another crime. In this case, they're arguing that the crime is allegedly to influence the 2016 election. In your view, has that aspect been made clear to the jury?
I was very surprised. I was one of the people who thought that I think the federal case against him in Washington, D.C. about January 6th is absolutely righteous. I think that the one in Mar-a-Lago, I was surprised that they filed it in Florida. I thought they should have filed it in D.C. I thought there was plenty of venue there. I think that case is a slam dunk. But I've always been dubious about this case, especially after the feds did not indict it based on the same quantum of evidence, knowing all these facts that, Cohn alleged, that Stormy Daniels alleged. I was very surprised about that. I think that we're seeing all of the problems come home. And what I thought they were going to have, Tiffany, I thought Michael Cohen was going to say he had a conversation with Trump where he told him, look, you're violating state finance law. You're violating state campaign finance laws. You're violating federal campaign finance laws. You're going to cheat on your taxes. You're going to write me off for $420,000, but it's the only way to go. Otherwise, it's going to all come out. He had conversations that he recounted with him, but he didn't have that kind of specific conversation. So I'm worried that what's going to happen is the judge is going to say any unlawful act, any intent to commit or conceal an unlawful act is fine. If you look at it, why would anyone falsify their financial records for any other reason than to commit some kind of crime? And without defining it, being so vague, everybody who's good for the misdemeanor would be good for the felony. So why did the legislature set out a misdemeanor totally separate from the felony? Is the misdemeanor only going to be good for the person who, let's say, falsifies their business records only to show them to someone at a reunion and tell them, look what a millionaire I am, look at my falsified tax records? Everything else is going to be for some potential attempted, because remember, there only has to be an attempt for the felony, for some attempted tax evasion, for some attempted campaign finance violation. And people have said, why hasn't the prosecution defined for the jury what campaign finance law is? Why didn't they have an expert to say, here's the campaign finance law. Look at how little. I mean, maybe Trump thought that you don't have to report anything under $135,000. Then he would have not attempted or had any reason to hide a $130,000 payment. How is the jury supposed to know any of that? So they're kind of shooting in the dark. That's the point that Trump's attorneys made. The other side of it, though, is if 4 of them thought it was a state campaign finance violation he was concealing, 4 jurors thought it was a federal campaign violation, 4 of them thought it was tax, they wouldn't convict, they would hang. And that's what the prosecution doesn't want. And it looks like that's the way Justice Marchand is going to rule. And that'll be the huge issue on appeal. Based on all of that and my prediction as to the jury instructions, that's why I believe that Trump is going to be found guilty of a felony. And then he'll have this interesting appellate issue.
Very fascinating. Well, David Katz, former assistant U.S. attorney and former federal prosecutor, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure being with you.
From manufacturing to critical technologies, tensions between the U.S. and Communist China have reached new heights over a string of trade restrictions. A government advisory group reflected on Washington's current economic strategy toward Beijing. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
On Thursday, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission held a hearing to examine Washington's China policies in the areas of trade, investment, and technology.
China's economy is roughly 5 times larger than when it entered the WTO, and years of corporate espionage, unfair trade practices, and industrial policy have helped shape it into an economic competitor, technological peer, and military challenger.
In September of 2000, the Senate voted to approve permanent most favored nation status for China. The decision led to a surge of foreign investments in the communist country. It also paved the way to the regime's accession to the World Trade Organization. But experts said China's trade expansion came at the expense of the U.S. economy.
China's share of global manufacturing GDP increased from approximately 6% in 2000 to about 24% in 2016. During that same period, the U.S. share of global manufacturing GDP dropped from 26% to 17%. During that time, U.S. manufacturing shed 5 million jobs, about 54,000 factories closed, and between 2000 and 2016, U.S. real median household income remained relatively flat.
Outside of manufacturing, reports suggest China has employed a variety of methods to acquire advanced U.S. technologies.
When we're talking about the critical technologies that can tip the balance of strategic and military power between the United States and China, our objective cannot be a level playing field. We do not want equal competition between the United States and a competitor that we may one day face on the battlefield.
Earlier this month, the Biden administration ramped up tariffs on roughly $18 billion worth of imports from China. The move targets a string of critical sectors, including semiconductors, electric vehicles, solar panels, and many others. The White House said that China is flooding the global market with cheap exports, which threatens American workers, businesses, and communities. Sam Wang, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Documentary filmmaker Morgan Spurlock has died at the age of 53. He's best known for his groundbreaking 2004 documentary, Super Size Me. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
Morgan Spurlock, who famously documented his experience eating only at McDonald's for a month, has died at 53.
I think people know fast food is bad for you, but I don't think people realize how bad fast food is for you.
The film was nominated for Best Documentary at the 2005 Academy Awards.
So what I'm showing in the film is over a long period of eating a high-fat, high-sugar, over-consuming, under-exercising diet, this is what can happen to you.
According to a statement from his family, Spurlock died Thursday in New York from complications of cancer. In the statement, his brother Craig Spurlock said, quote, "It was a sad day as we said goodbye to my brother Morgan. Morgan gave so much through his art, ideas, and generosity. The world has lost a true creative genius and a special man. I am so proud to have worked together with him." Following Super Size Me, Spurlock went on to direct 70 documentaries and TV series. Titles include Where in the World is Osama bin Laden, 30 Days, and Super Size Me 2 Holy Chicken. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start with the NCAA's proposed settlement agreement that will allow schools to start paying their athletes. How did all of this come about?
On the surface, it was to settle multiple lawsuits is a simple answer. But I think public pressure really had a lot to do with it. It was just a year and a half ago, the Big Ten signed that 7-year, $7 billion TV agreements with Fox, CBS, and NBC to air their football games. Now, they reported $880 million in revenue in their last fiscal year, and that's going to jump up with that new TV deal and with the additions of UCLA and USC next season. So it's very tough to claim, financial hardship when those numbers are right up there for the public to see. I also think allowing athletes to profit from their name, images, and likeness 3 years ago kind of paved the way for this. All of a sudden the sentiment was, why did this take so long and what else needs to be done? Now, I think this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. The agreement allows schools to pay their athletes. Those who can afford it, and you would think members of the very wealthy, Big Ten and SEC will definitely have no problem doing that. But I think the less wealthy Big 12 and ACC schools, see how they fare here is going to be very interesting because of the 4 power conference schools, there's really a growing gap between them, and I think this could expose that.
Moving to tennis news, number 1 ranked Novak Djokovic lost today in the semifinals of the Geneva Open. The loss means he'll enter the French Open without a title in 2024. Is he still considered the favorite?
He's at least one of them anyway. His record of 14-6 this year is definitely concerning. He does not have a title, as you mentioned. For comparison, he went 56-7 last year. Now, the rankings are based on a rolling 1-year period, so he's at least holding his own on there for right now. But I also think people were wondering, when or if his age would ever catch up to him. He just turned 37, maybe it's starting to. Now, before he and Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer came along, age 30 was considered old in tennis, but their post-30 success has really rewritten that narrative. Djokovic has won 11 of his 24 Grand Slam titles after turning 30. Nadal's got 8, Federer had 4. But I think age obviously is going to catch up to everyone eventually. Having watched him for years, he always plays his best at the majors. So I think with this French Open next week, we're going to see where he is and where Rafael Nadal is, both age-wise and physical-wise.
Looking to the NBA playoffs, we have Game 2 tonight between Dallas and Minnesota. Now, the Mavericks pulled off the upset in Minnesota in Game 1. How critical is it for the Timberwolves to get a win tonight?
I mean, it's practically a must-win, which sounds crazy for a Game 2, but they saw what happened in the last series. Denver lost the first 2 games at home. History shows Denver had just a 17% chance of winning the series at that point. Now, Denver came back, won 3 in a row, but then Minnesota took games 6 and 7 to win what was a roller coaster series. Now, it's so hard to do because in that case, after you lose the first 2 at home, you have to win 4 of the next 5 with the majority of those games on the road. And Game 1 was close, a 3-point win by Dallas. I'm expecting Minnesota to come out with much more energy. I mean, sometimes there's a letdown after you beat the presumptive title favorite, which Denver was. So I'm interested to see what Minnesota's mentality looks like tonight.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Tiff.
Classic car owners in California are growing increasingly concerned as they fear that carbon neutrality policies might phase out their vehicles. NTD's BJ Kang speaks with them as they share their worries.
Here in the Golden State, classic cars are a staple of the vehicle population that cruise up and down our streets and highways. But could an iconic part of California's culture disappear as a result of its own state policies? In 2022, the California Air Resources Board created a scoping plan to help achieve Governor Newsom's carbon neutrality goals. The plan seeks to reduce demand for liquid petroleum by 94% and total fossil fuel by 86% in 2045 relative to 2022. Car owners shared how they feel about this policy.
Pretty soon we cannot run our cars because they keep on restricting the gassing. And all these old cars needs fuel.
If we can get gas, we can run. But obviously if we can't get any gas, we can't do it.
Car owners were also skeptical about how realistic it would be to effectively switch a majority of the Californian population to a zero-emissions car infrastructure.
I mean, they have to supply the need for the people. The people can't afford to go out and buy these electric cars. They can't afford to replace the battery after 3 years when they take a dump. So what are they going to do with all the batteries that are stacked up? That's environment. That's terrible.
CARB told NTD in a statement that their scoping plan expects that there will be fossil fuel available beyond 2045. CARB added that zero emissions requirements have only been applicable to new vehicles, but car owners still emphasize the role that classic cars play in our culture.
Oh, they're not only California history, but they're U.S. history. I grew up on the East Coast, and classics are as big back there as they are out here. But so much of it started right here in Southern California. From drag racing to classic cars to custom cars to most of the designers all came from right here locally.
I think that the classic cars that keeps everybody from my era to the present era of what was happening back in the 50s and the 60s. So it just keeps all of that alive.
In response to that, CARB stated, "I have no doubt that in the future, just as there will still be owners of 23 or 32 Fords, 64 VW buses, or 67 Camaros, somebody's classic may be a 2010 Tesla Roadster or a 2011 Leaf," insinuating that the legacy of classic cars will only be expanded and not erased. BJ Kang, NTD News, California.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.